Heartbreak for an asylum-seeking family who made a harrowing journey to San Diego. The father separated, his asylum case denied. Now supporters are trying to stop his deportation. Local governments embrace community choice energy, how the city and county of San Diego are moving forward. And it might be another year before shovels are in the ground, but SDSU now has a partner and a price for its new stadium. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, energy reporter Joshua Emerson Smith of the San Diego Union-Tribune, Kate Morrissey, who covers immigration and the border for the Union-Tribune, and KPBS business and environment reporter Eric Anderson. Well, Donald Trump declares an immigration emergency at the border. Democrats in Congress moved to block him, accusing the president of ginning up a phony crisis using phony stats. Meantime, thousands of people seeking asylum in the U.S. from horrors back home wait on both sides of the border for their cases to play out. Often lost in all of this is what happens to the real people, including those who risk death to reach the border and who face death if their asylum claim is turned down. Supporters are rallying around one such family this week in San Diego. They're not from Latin America, but from the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa. And Kate, start there. What's the overview on this family? What did they go through to get to our border?
It's a little hard to give an overview because they went through so many things. Their story, as they told it to me, begins a couple of years ago with the father supporting one of the opposition parties in the DRC, one of the parties that is pushing for greater democracy in the country. And he ended up being targeted by the party in power, kidnapped by police, beaten, tortured. The wife who went to look for him was similarly locked up by police at the police station and then raped by several of the officers there. The family was later poisoned while they were asleep. Someone injected something into the house that they woke up feeling very ill. Their dog was killed. They were constantly going through these different kinds of threats, and so they fled and went through a very long journey from Africa to Brazil, up from Brazil through what's a pretty common migrant path these days, but still a very dangerous one. As they were crossing between two of the countries in Central America, they were on a boat trying to go the naval route, and the boat ended up getting in a shipwreck, and so they all almost drowned, and they believe it's sort of this miracle of God that both parents and the 7 children all managed to survive that and make it up to the U.S. border where they requested asylum.
Yeah, harrowing doesn't quite cover that. I mean, it's a remarkable story. But the father wound up in Georgia, the state of Georgia, and his claim has already been denied. Explain, why was his case split off from the rest of the family? So for a long time, it was pretty common practice if a full family showed up together for the father of the family to be sent to immigration detention centers somewhere in the country while the rest of the family was released. They can't hold children indefinitely in detention, and so they would keep the children with the mother to take care of the children, and usually the father would be separated. But the thing is when you separate the family, the cases also get separated in immigration court. So the father's case was out of the detention center where he was held in rural Georgia. The family's case is actually still pending here in San Diego. So they're just on different tracks, and as I said, his has already been denied. So that brings us to the rally here this week, yesterday in San Diego. Explain what's happened there. So he basically tried to represent himself in immigration court, which is very difficult to do for anyone. He's not a native English speaker. His English isn't strong. You have to fill out all of the paperwork in English. You have to have translations of all of your documents in English. And he struggled with that. He lost his case. He tried to appeal his case by himself as well. And it was only after he lost the appeal that a church that the family joined here found out what was going on and managed to find an attorney to step in and try to help. So now that he's already lost his appeal, there's a much more sort of limited set of legal options. And so that attorney has been filing emergency
motions to keep him here in the country with the 11th Circuit. And the 11th Circuit had an emergency stay on his removal up until today. And so yesterday's rally was in support of him to ask ICE not to deport him today when that emergency stay ended.
And it's clear, based on the story as you laid it out, that if he were to be sent back and deported back to the Congo, which I assume is where they deport him to, I mean, his life is in grave danger.
Certainly, according to his story, his family's story, what's been told to me, they all believe that he's in grave danger and very likely to be killed if he goes back. All
right, we do have a statement, a soundbite from his daughter Marie from yesterday's rally. Let's hear that.
I feel very sad. My family and I, we feel very sad because we miss my dad a lot. He was the only one who was helping me with my homework, who was telling me that education is the most important in life. And now I feel like I have to do everything by myself. And I miss my dad a lot. And please, don't deport my dad. Give him a chance to stay with us and to help me again, because I feel like I have to do everything by myself. Thank you.
Certainly a heartrending story there at that rally. What's the situation now with this family?
So,
aside from the dad's case,
as of this morning, they were all still waiting to hear what would happen from the 11th Circuit. Like I said, the attorney had filed another motion with the 11th Circuit to try and keep him here longer while she tries to reopen his case to say, I have new evidence, I have things I can submit that weren't in the original case. I'd like the ability to submit those and go back over those with a judge. And so it's all sort of in this limbo to see how much they'll be allowed to do that.
And after everything they've gone through to get here, as we described, how are they coping now? I mean, the pressures on the family must be enormous, facing the patriarch, the father here.
Yeah, so they're definitely going through a lot. I think even absent the separation, there's a lot of trauma from the different things they've lived through. The mother has been evaluated by a psychiatric expert. She definitely has PTSD and other symptoms of trauma that show what she's been through. When she tells her story, you can sort of see it in her face and hear it in her voice. The sort of it's almost a distance that she places between herself and the words that are coming out.
Now, we've noted this on the show before here, but these folks are seeking asylum under laws and treaties in many countries, the United States among them, have these laws allowing people who show up at the border to have a hearing and grant them asylum if they're deemed worthy of that under their situation under the law. Give us some sense of the scope here. I mean, how many folks are trying to apply for asylum? I don't know if the numbers are even that definite at this point.
It is really hard to get at that number. There's a lot of different points at which people can enter the system, and there's a lot of different ways you could measure it. So you have people who are arriving at the border without documents saying, please help me, I'd like asylum. You also have people
from Latin America,
from Latin America, from different countries in Africa, from China, from all over the place, India. You also have people who manage to come on visitor visas, student visas, who walk in the door with a piece of paper that says, yes, you can come in, and then once they're here, they apply for asylum. And as long as they do that within their first year of being here, they go through another process. You also have people who maybe don't make their asylum claim right away, but later on in their immigration court proceedings, they say, oh no, I've been evaluated and it turns out my attorney thinks I might have an asylum case, so let me apply. So it's really hard to get at that number because we measure pieces of it and we measure in different ways, but we don't, as far as I've found, and I'm previously a data reporter, so I've looked pretty hard. It's really hard to get at that number.
Okay. All right. Well, we're out of time on this segment, but we'll certainly watch for the follow-up and what happens to this family and this ongoing issue of asylum at the border. It's not going away anytime soon. Well, San Diego is embarking on a major experiment regarding something vital to all of us, energy. It's a public alternative to San Diego Gas and Electric with the cumbersome name of Community Choice Aggregation, or CCA. always stumble with that. This has happened elsewhere in California since 2010, but SDG&E faces the biggest loss of customers in the state. It's a complicated story with huge ramifications because, of course, Joshua, it's all about energy. And tell us, what is CCA? Give us the thumbnail on that one.
So community choice aggregation, or community choice energy, as some people call it, is somewhere between a municipal utility like LA Water and Power and just having your investor-owned utility service your jurisdiction, right? So with the municipal utility, the public agency owns everything, the poles, the wires, and they decide where they're going to purchase the electricity from a natural gas plant, wind, solar, what have you. With community choice aggregation, which is like a hybrid of the two, the public entity will decide where they're going to purchase the energy from, but here in San Diego, SDG&E would still operate the poles and wires and the infrastructure to deliver the energy.
All right. Eric?
And is it the case where the utility is essentially put out of business, or does it change their business model?
Yeah, so they're not put out of business with community choice aggregation, right? So they still will operate the grid, right? They're still going to get the electricity from A to B, but the city or the Joint Powers Authority, the group of cities or a group of municipal organizations will decide where that power is coming from. They'll say, well, we want to contract with this natural gas plant, or actually we want to contract with this solar plant, and they'll ink the deals for deciding where the power comes from.
And the idea is that consumers get a choice, so prices are more favorable, and also you're going to move toward clean energy and get away from fossil fuels in the long run.
Yeah, so the advocates of CCA say, well, too much money goes to these executives at SDG&E and Sempra, right? Like, let's not deal with all of that overhead. We can deliver a more efficient way of getting that power, of buying that power, and we can also make decisions about what we're going to invest in. So we're going to say, yeah, we want to build a lot of solar right here in our backyard, and we want to put people to work, and we want to make all these decisions about what we invest in. The tricky thing with this, though, is CCA is not a utility, right? So its bond ratings and the amount of assets it has to borrow against are extremely limited. And that's where we are right now in this kind of initial stage where we've seen CCAs coming about for the last 10 years or so. But the question that's lingering out there is, will they really be able to make good on their promise of investing in new renewable energy?
And even after 10 years, it's too early to tell from other cities in California.
That's a really good point, right? Like, we've seen this, well, it really has kind of picked up over the last 5 years. And now the experts who are following this say, we're going to need another 3 to 5 years to really see if they can deliver on these promises. Because remember, cities don't want to put their general funds behind a CCA. They don't. If the CCA goes belly up, they don't want the general fund to be on the hook.
They don't want to be on the hook,
right?
Yeah.
So that's why they form these joint powers authorities, right? And that's what the city of San Diego and all these other cities are looking to do.
Yeah, tell us. So San Diego's the big dog here, but they're trying to get a whole region of cities involved, right?
Totally, right? Like, so CCA has been on everyone's lips, right, for the last 3 years, or we've been reporting on it for the last 3 or 4 years, right? But recently, Kevin Faulconer, the mayor of San Diego, said, you know what, we're really going to do that. And ever since he said that back in, I believe it was October or November, everyone else in the region has been kind of dogpiling on top, being like, yeah, we want to be part of that too. We want to be part of this Joint Powers Authority, and we'll all buy energy together and life will be great, right? Even the county of San Diego.
Well, there's a couple of supervisors that are still kind of on the fence on this.
Yes, but in February 2017, the County Board of Supervisors wouldn't even study it, right? Now there's been some turnover on the board, and now they're saying, yeah, we're interested in maybe joining too.
All right, that sets up a soundbite we have. Nathan Fletcher was one of the backers, but so was longtime supervisor Diane Jacob. Here's what she had to say about it.
But this is positive. This has been done somewhere else. And just looking up north, the LA County Board of Supervisors has been operating a community choice energy program for the last 18 months, and they've entered into a joint powers authority with some 40 different cities in the LA area. And it's working well. And what they have is not one choice, but they have a whole list of choices that consumers can pick from. If somebody wants to go 100% renewables, they can do that. If they want to mix, they can do that.
All right, Eric?
Well, the question I have for you is the utility was fighting this proposal early on, right? They didn't want this to happen, but now, doesn't it seem to you like they're kind of accepting the idea that this is probably going to happen, and they're already in contact with the state's regulators to see if how their role is going to change?
Absolutely, right. So SDG&E had a major lobbying campaign against this, right? But that was disbanded several months ago after the mayor came out and said that the city was going to do this. And now, at the latest hearing at the Board of Supervisors, SDG&E stood up and said, you know, we'll lend you our experts. We'll help you put this together if that's the direction you want to go. And they've even gone so far as to talk to the legislature and the Public Utilities Commission and request a glide path out of buying and selling power altogether. They're saying this CCA in San Diego could encompass so much of our business, roughly 70 to 80% if all the cities that are talking about it pile in, that we would say, let's just get out of the business of buying, selling power altogether. We'll just operate the grid, and you guys can go ahead and make your decisions about that. Now, that raises a whole bunch of other questions, right, about who's going to be the provider of last resort, right? If the CCA goes under, who's going to keep the lights on, right? So we've opened a whole Pandora's box with that. But yeah, they're basically said, you know, okay, you guys look like you want to do this. We're not going to fight anymore.
SDG&E hold the G&E, I guess it would be at that point. How long are we talking about here? Who knows? It could be years yet before this really comes to fruition if we get there.
No, I mean, we're talking 2021, you know, they could have the JPA in place, you know, and delivering power by 2022, I believe, off the top of my head.
All right, well, a lot more to follow up there, of course.
Yeah.
We're out of time on this segment, but I'm sure we'll have you back to talk about this and what it means on the ground for the average consumer in business. Well, we're going to move on. San Diego State University has entered into a $250 million contract to build a football stadium for the Aztecs. First step in developing the Mission Valley Stadium site, which was green-lighted by voters last fall. But the move raises many questions. Foremost, where's that $250 million coming from? And a lot more money after that, right, Eric? So start with this contract. Who's it with, and what's the specifics?
Sure. What they're doing is they're engaging a firm, Clark Construction, that helped build Petco Park. So they have a track record. It's a national company. They've done all sorts of projects, from stadiums, they do buildings, they work with colleges, they do commercial work, just a wide range of expertise, and they've had contact with the local community.
And work right on this campus with San Diego State, right? I should stop and point out our housekeeping here. San Diego State University holds the KPBS license.
That is correct. And what the university has done is basically said, look, we're going to spend $250 million on a brand new multi-sports facility. This is the company that we're going to work with to kind of pick the architect, finalize the design, and then actually let them build the facility. Where does the money come from? That's a very good question. The idea, I think, before voters took their position on the ballot measure that was approved in November, the university was saying, look, we're going to get the California State University system to kind of give us some bond money that we can use to buy the stadium property and then to start the construction of
demolish the old stadium.
Demolish the old stadium and start construction of the new stadium so they can have it ready for 2022 is their timeline. And then that bond money would be repaid over time. The athletic director at San Diego State University has said, look, we want this facility to be able to pay for itself. But the university hasn't really shared a lot of what their findings are on the numbers. And I think there's some skepticism about whether or not the facility, which right now would only have one tenant, which would be the Aztec football team, which isn't exactly a paying tenant if you own the structure. Not quite clear if that creates enough revenue to pay for the kind of facility that they want to build.
Oh, I see. And like, what would be some of the other potential clients?
They're looking at soccer teams that could come in, professional soccer teams. They're looking at arena football. We've seen some of that here. I'm sure that they've probably had discussions with other sports, professional sports or semi-professional sports leagues. The idea is to keep the stadium facility in use, and that's how it generates the revenue, right? You have concessions, you have whatever parking there might be there, you have the fees paid for use of the facility. So I think that's their goal. We're just not quite sure, and the university hasn't been really transparent about the financials that they've looked into. And it is something they've looked into. JMI Realty, which was one of their contractors, did financial modeling of that project, and they have those numbers, but the university has not been willing to share those, and they're facing a couple of lawsuits, one from the UT.
What about like concerts? Could it have,
sure.
Yeah. So
any use. I think if it was up to them, they would use the facility 365 days a year if that was possible, because anytime you use the facility, it generates revenue.
Somebody's renting it. So the other questions you touched on this is the land itself. They've got a contract to build a big, huge
there is news
stadium, but no land.
There is news this weekend. The university has assembled a team of negotiators, and they're preparing to start negotiations with the city of San Diego. But remember, the bond measure was approved back in November, and we're already in March now. So, and they hope to have an environmental impact review done by January of next year.
And that's not a small thing either.
Not a small project either. It can be done, but it's not a small project.
But they were hoping to bypass that, right?
No. This is actually one of their selling points, was they were going to do this environmental impact review. They were going to seek out public comment. It's all part of the California environmental.
City was going to bypass it,
right?
With the ballot measure.
Right. So they want to do this by January of 2020 so that they can start building the stadium that month and have it ready for the Aztec football season in 2022.
Does that seem a little optimistic at this point?
It's a very aggressive time. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's a very aggressive timeline. If there's a hiccup in the environmental impact review, if there's a problem that they have to kind of spend some time working out.
Well, we should say briefly, there's that plume, that whole
I was going to say
that whole toxic issue of
you find
the fuel tanks nearby and the plume.
What you find when you dig
lot.
up that parking lot may not be a good thing, and it may upset the aggressive timeline that they have.
Right. So we've got all that going on. I wanted to, talk about the revenue itself. San Diego State hasn't been all that successful in selling out the current stadium, or even a big part of the stadium. You've got some national analysts have been quoted in the UT here saying that other than Ohio State and Michigan and Alabama and the big power schools, a lot of these college football stadiums don't pencil out. They really operate in the red.
If you're a businessman and you want to build a business, very few businessmen who do their homework choose to build a stadium. Even a professional stadium in many markets doesn't make money. It requires public support. So yeah, the finances are kind of squishy. But again, the university has not been very straightforward in sharing some of the numbers that they have and some of the numbers that they're working for. So we don't quite understand the source of their revenue and how much revenue they expect to generate, and in what economic conditions they would be able to operate, in the black. We don't know if they're able to do it if the economy takes a turn to the left or the right, and we don't know exactly what kind of a ballpark they're looking for in terms of the amount of money that they can raise every year to pay off the bonds. And the contract was $250 million. But that doesn't mean that's what the final stadium is going to cost. That just means that they've signed a contract and committed themselves to spending that much money. It
change order
conceivably could cost more. It's their initial estimate that they made almost 2 years ago. So
what are like the intangibles? So like if it's not going to pay for itself, why do they want it? Like what?
Well, they need a place for the Aztec football team to play. They need to have a home for that, and presumably I would imagine that they will put some other San Diego State University sports in there when they can. Maybe the soccer team plays there, other sports. So they need a home for their sports program. The sports program is part of the school's identity that they want to kind of raise to a higher level.
Right,
so that's critical.
Profile.
That's critical for the university. The interesting thing, I think, during the campaign, they went out of their way to make the point that they weren't going to spend public and or student money on this project.
Taxpayers won't be on the hook.
And I think a lot of people are questioning whether that's possible, and we just simply don't know the answer to that yet. But if we hold them to their word, this is a project that's not going to cost taxpayers a penny.
All right, briefly, and we'll be more shows on this, I'm sure. The status of the other development at that Mission Valley site, aside from the stadium.
Well, stadium is just kind of the kickoff project. The university has to buy the land, the 132 acres. They have to demolish Qualcomm, make sure that there are no problems there under that facility, and then they want to start construction of that stadium, and that's all in that January 2020 start date, August 2022 finish date, so they can be ready for football. As those projects move, they'll be also working on building the housing that they want to build there, the public-private partnerships that are going to pay some of the pay for some of the other development on the site. So it doesn't. This is just one slice of a very big project.
Right.
That the university
and we'll be taking a lot more slices at that apple as we move forward. We are out of time. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Joshua Emerson Smith of the San Diego Union Tribune, Kate Morrissey, also of the Union Tribune, and Eric Anderson of KPBS News. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for being with us today, and join us again next Friday on the Roundtable.